Have you ever watched someone walk into a trap and smile like they built it? That's exactly what happened the night Cassandra Vale was handed a white envelope in front of 300 of the city's most powerful guests. A night meant to humiliate her. A night carefully orchestrated by her billionaire husband, Royce Vale. But instead of crumbling, she simply exhaled. And with that one breath, she rewrote the story everyone thought they were watching. The crowd expected drama. They expected tears. What they got was something else entirely. Now let's rewind, because to understand why Royce made this move and why Cassandra's calm shattered him more than any slap or scream ever could, you have to know who these two people really were and what had already been set in motion before he even tapped that glass. Cassandra Vale was never just the billionaire's wife. Before she met Royce, she was a force. Harvard law graduate, undefeated litigator, a woman who dismantled corporate loopholes while still in her 20s. Her colleagues once called her the velvet knife because she could smile while tearing your legal argument to shreds. Royce, meanwhile, was Silicon Valley's golden boy, founder of multiple startups, media darling, keynote speaker, the kind of man who always looked 5 steps ahead, or so he thought. They met at a tech conference in Lisbon. She was there as legal counsel for a venture fund. He was there pitching his new AI platform to investors. Their meeting wasn't some fairy tale spark. It was more like a high-stakes chess match with wine glasses. But Cassandra, she liked challenges. And Royce, he liked control. Their courtship was fast and intense. Lavish weekends in Napa, private jets to Tokyo. He read her legal briefs. She decoded his contracts in seconds. And within a year, he asked her to leave her firm to build something bigger with him. And she did. She became the architect behind his empire's legal foundation. Every deal, every partnership, every risky loophole passed through her hands. Royce had the charisma. Cassandra had the precision. Together, they were unstoppable. But over time, that partnership shifted. Cassandra began to disappear, not from the company, but from the spotlight. Her name was removed from press releases, her role quietly redefined to focus on philanthropy. Gala planning replaced board meetings. By year 8 of their marriage, she wasn't introducing ideas in conference rooms. She was introducing speakers at charity balls. And that's the thing. Most people thought she stepped back because she wanted to. They were wrong. She was pushed. And Royce, he didn't just want the power, he wanted the credit, the legacy, the illusion that he'd built it all alone. The cracks deepened with every mistress Cassandra pretended not to notice, with every empty seat across from her at private dinners, with every lie disguised as just business. But she stayed, not because she was weak, because she was watching and remembering and planning. I'm going to pause here and ask you something. If you were Cassandra, brilliant, strategic, and betrayed, would you have walked away quietly, or would you wait and choose your moment? Because that's what she did. Fast forward to the Vale Foundation Gala, an annual spectacle Royce used to polish his brand as a generous tech visionary. Held in a glass-walled ballroom towering above the skyline, this was his kingdom. U.S. senators were in attendance, CEOs, celebrities, everyone who mattered. And in Royce's mind, this would be the perfect place to announce the end of his marriage and the beginning of his new life with a much younger woman, a woman who, let's just say, Cassandra knew far more about than Royce ever imagined. He had planned everything, even the moment the envelope would be delivered to Cassandra by a uniformed waiter. And right on cue, it happened. Cassandra, dressed in a sleek obsidian gown that caught the light like polished armor, didn't even flinch as the envelope landed in her lap. No confusion, no anger. She simply placed her champagne glass down, wiped her fingers with a linen napkin, and opened it. Now, here's where the story takes a sharp turn, because Royce, smug and already half smirking at the mic, tapped his glass to get everyone's attention. Some news, he began, is best shared in the presence of friends and partners. Nervous chuckles bubbled in the crowd. Cassandra didn't move. Royce continued, "My wife has just been served with divorce papers." And the room froze. You could feel the air get heavy. People stared, waiting for Cassandra to cry, shout, leave, something. But instead, she calmly folded the papers, looked up, and said only 3 words. "Thank you, Royce." No tears, no theatrics, just a small nod and silence. And that, right there, was the beginning of the end for Royce. Because what no one knew, not even Royce himself, was that Cassandra had been preparing for this moment for months. Not for revenge, but for truth, for precision. And the real envelope, the one with the real power, that one hadn't come from Royce. It had come from her. And it was about to detonate everything. Most people in that ballroom left thinking Cassandra Vale had just been humiliated with grace, that she'd handled public divorce papers like a stoic wife who had lost the fight but managed to keep her dignity. But what they didn't know, what no one suspected, not even Royce, was that Cassandra hadn't just endured a spectacle. She had orchestrated one. While everyone's eyes were glued to Royce, standing proudly at the microphone, reveling in his moment of control, Cassandra had already begun the quiet dismantling of the empire he thought was untouchable. She didn't need to make a scene. She already had the one thing more powerful than public sympathy: truth, organized, documented, and sealed in an envelope of her own. It had been sitting inside her clutch the entire evening, silent and damning. That very night, as Royce celebrated behind closed doors with his board members and his carefully curated inner circle, Cassandra didn't call her friends. She didn't cry in a limousine. She simply handed her driver a different address, a small law office in downtown Los Angeles where her legal team had been working quietly for nearly a year. At exactly 7:14 a.m. the next morning, a discreet package arrived at the Securities and Exchange Commission. No sender, just a simple typed label: financial irregularities, urgent review. Inside was over 200 pages of ledgers, email printouts, shell company registrations, and encrypted financial statements, all linked to the Vale Foundation, the very nonprofit Royce used as a trophy of his virtue. That's when everything started to fall apart. You see, Royce had always used the foundation to polish his image, donating to education, disaster relief, even mental health awareness. He gave speeches about giving back. He took photos with children in underserved communities. But what Cassandra's files revealed told a different story. The foundation wasn't just a charity, it was a machine. One that disguised personal expenses as philanthropic projects, rerouted investor donations through offshore accounts, and inflated asset reports to artificially raise Valetech's stock price. And the most devastating detail? The woman Royce had been quietly seeing, the one he had left Cassandra for, was also the chief financial officer of that same foundation. The woman who had smiled beside him at the gala, wearing a diamond necklace, likely paid for by donor funds, was not only his mistress, she was his co-conspirator. Cassandra had found out everything, not through confrontation, not through suspicion, through observation, through listening, through patience. She noticed when Royce started locking his laptop more often, but left the backup drive plugged in. She paid attention when invoices had vague descriptions like consultation and outreach services, but carried 6-figure amounts. She memorized account numbers whispered over late-night calls when he thought she was asleep. This wasn't revenge. This was justice with precision. And now the SEC had everything. While Royce still basked in his moment of so-called liberation, the stock market started to whisper. Vale Tech dipped 7 points by noon. By 3 p.m., it was down 12. Financial analysts began to speculate. Something wasn't right. Journalists started calling. By the next day, Royce's lawyers were on high alert, but it was already too late. The anonymous tip, backed by forensic accounting and time-stamped evidence, had opened an investigation. And once federal regulators started pulling the thread, the entire fabric of his empire began to unravel. Now here's where it gets even more incredible. And honestly, this is the part that made me sit up in disbelief. The papers Royce had given Cassandra at the gala, the big stunt, the public divorce announcement, they weren't real. Somewhere between the printing and the gala, Cassandra had swapped them. What Royce actually handed her, what he announced in front of a room full of witnesses and cameras, wasn't a standard divorce petition. It was a notarized legal declaration, carefully crafted by Cassandra's legal team, that acknowledged ownership and knowledge of several overseas financial assets. He had signed it in public, on camera. That one signature tied him directly to every account, every offshore transaction, every falsified donation. And because it was signed under no duress, in a formal setting, with witnesses and footage, it was admissible in court. Cassandra didn't just turn the tables, she removed them from under him. And still, she said nothing. She let the markets react. She let the lawyers panic. She let the world wonder. She walked through it all in silence, allowing Royce to unravel himself, thread by arrogant thread. This wasn't some emotional meltdown or impulsive retaliation. This was a masterclass in restraint. And if you ask me, that's what made it so powerful. Cassandra never raised her voice. She never threw a drink. She never threatened him. She let the paper trail do the talking. She let timing do the damage. And the best part? The moment that made everything come full circle? That came a few days later. At a press conference, Royce's PR team scrambled to organize in an attempt to control the narrative. Cameras were ready. Reporters were hungry. But when the room fell silent and the doors opened, it wasn't Royce who walked in first. It was Cassandra. Hair pulled back, black suit, no makeup, no entourage. She didn't step up to the mic. She didn't make a statement. She stood quietly beside her lead attorney as the team laid out the real story. Fact by fact, date by date, document by document. They unveiled the official creation of the Cassandra Vale Foundation, a new legal advocacy group for women in high-control marriages and business partnerships. The organization would be funded entirely by assets seized from Royce Vale's personal fortune and fraudulent nonprofits. The office space? The very same suite Royce once used for board meetings with tech CEOs. The staff? Already hired. The plaque? Already engraved. This wasn't reactive. This was a plan, long in motion. While Royce thought he was playing a public relations game, Cassandra was preparing an execution. And she never raised her voice to do it. Let that sink in for a moment. This woman, silenced, erased from headlines, reduced to a trophy wife, had not only taken back her power, she had turned every injustice into a calculated act of exposure. She didn't burn his house down. She handed him the match, the fuel, and waited patiently while he lit it himself. And then she walked away, untouched. So now I'll ask you, if you were in her shoes, would you have done the same? Waited all those years? Or would you have walked away the first time he looked past you? Because what Cassandra did wasn't just courageous, it was surgical, and the world was finally watching. 3 weeks later, Royce Vale was arrested on federal charges: fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, embezzlement. The man who once stood in front of Ivy League graduates giving speeches about innovation and integrity was now reduced to a mugshot in an orange jumpsuit. It didn't happen with a bang. No sirens, no helicopters. Just a knock on the door of his Malibu estate and a quiet, measured voice. "Mr. Vale, we have a warrant." That's the thing about power. It doesn't always get taken. Sometimes it's returned to the rightful owner by the same hands that once gave it away. Royce thought he controlled the narrative. He thought he controlled Cassandra. But when the headlines shifted from tech titan announces divorce to federal investigation rocks Vale empire, even his most loyal allies disappeared. Sponsors pulled out. Investors fled. Political figures who once dined at his home scrubbed his name from their campaign donation lists. Vale Tech's stock collapsed like a house of cards. And through all of it, Cassandra never said a word. She let silence speak. That silence was her weapon. It was heavier than outrage, more devastating than scandal. And I think that's what broke Royce the most. Because when you're used to commanding attention, nothing is more painful than being ignored by the person who once saw you completely. What the public didn't know, what I think is worth reflecting on, is that Cassandra had every chance to destroy him with noise. She had video clips, voice recordings, confession emails. She had every right to scream, but she didn't. And maybe that's the most terrifying power of all. While Royce sat in a holding cell, Cassandra walked through the doors of her newly launched foundation, the one that bore her name, funded by the dismantled empire of the man who once tried to erase her. The office was modest, no gold accents, no sweeping skyline views, but it was full of life. staffed with women and men who had been through similar storms, survivors of control, manipulation, financial captivity. They were lawyers, social workers, counselors, accountants. All of them had one thing in common. They believed in rebuilding, and at the head of it, Cassandra Vale. Not a victim, not a widow of ambition, not an accessory to someone else's story, but the author of her own. A week after Royce's arrest, a reporter finally caught up to her outside the courthouse. Microphones rushed in. Cameras swarmed. The reporter, clearly bracing for a fierce quote, asked, "Ms. Vale, do you feel vindicated?" And Cassandra, who hadn't spoken publicly since the gala, looked at him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "I feel free." That was it. No press conference. No call for vengeance. Just two words. And those words said everything. It made me think, how many people, especially women, get buried behind someone else's success? How many are told to be quiet, to be graceful, to support from the shadows? And how many, like Cassandra, wait not for revenge, but for the moment where truth can stand without shouting? Royce's trial took months. The evidence was airtight. Anonymous tips had been matched with encrypted emails. Offshore accounts had been traced back to shell foundations tied to real estate, luxury travel, even jewelry bought for his mistress. And remember that notarized document Royce signed at the gala? It turned out to be the linchpin in the case. His own signature on his own downfall, witnessed by governors, CEOs, and journalists. He tried to claim ignorance. He said it was a setup. He said he was manipulated. But the court didn't believe him. Because no one made Royce lie for 17 years. No one made him hide money. No one made him replace loyalty with lust and precision with ego. He did that on his own. The sentencing was quiet. 15 years without parole, and that was just the beginning. There were civil suits, class actions, restitution demands. And while the legal world buzzed with the news, Cassandra was already 2 steps ahead, setting up scholarship funds, pushing legislation that required financial transparency in nonprofit boards, and creating a database for whistleblowers. She didn't just break free, she turned pain into policy. The final moment that still echoes in my head wasn't in the courtroom. It wasn't in a news clip. It was from a grainy cell phone video recorded by a bystander weeks after the trial ended. Cassandra was walking out of a cafe in Tribeca when she spotted a young woman crying on the curb. She sat beside her. No cameras, no security, just two women, talking. That's the version of Cassandra people didn't see during the marriage. Not the woman in couture beside a CEO. The woman who still remembered what it felt like to be invisible. Who knew how much of strength it took to be quiet for that long? And then there was the ballroom. Because that, more than the arrest, more than the trial, more than the foundation, is the image people remember most. After Royce tapped his glass, after she opened the envelope, after she said those three simple words, "Thank you, Royce," and the room gasped. Something happened. Cassandra stood. She took one last look at the place where she had once been background. She didn't wave. She didn't nod. She just walked. Every heel strike on the marble echoed louder than applause. And just before she reached the double doors, she paused, turned slightly, looked out at the sea of faces, some shocked, some embarrassed, some ashamed, and she smiled. But it wasn't smug. It wasn't cruel. It was peace. The peace of a woman who had finally stepped out from behind the curtain, who had finally been heard without ever raising her voice. The kind of peace that comes only after years of carrying the weight of someone else's ego in silence. The kind of peace that says, "I don't need to win your game. I built my own." So now I'll ask you, again, and this time for real, what would you have done? Would you have fought back loudly, broken everything, made noise? Or would you have done what Cassandra did? Waited, planned, listened, and when the time was right, let the truth do the talking? Was silence her greatest weapon, or her greatest act of strength? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. And if this story moved you like it moved me, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Because the next story we're covering, let's just say it involves a millionaire heiress who faked her own death to catch her husband red-handed, and it makes this one look tame.